ready to begin now. Cryptocurrency and the new psychology of money. I wonder what that could be. Because when you think about it, money influences your psychology. How we think about it is very important. And the person who's going to talk to you about this is ideally suited for it. Now, he is a person that has worked extensively in this, in cryptocurrencies, how to use them, and he's working right now on his master's degree in clinical mental health psychology. He also has a bachelor's degree in psychology. He's going to talk about how dollars and money affect us and brings changes. Now, he knows about crypto as well. Get this combination. He's got the psychology background, studying it, getting his master's now, and he is a regular journalist for Bitcoin.com. So he knows that we've got the perfect person in the entire world, and I don't mean that as hyperbole, that is true, helping us on this. His name is Sterling Lujan. He's my friend. Please join me in welcoming him now.
How is everybody today? Awesome. Great. Well, I want you guys to humor me real quick with a few questions. I'm going to ask you a few questions. Was anybody who's in this room, as they were growing up, as when you were children or when you were younger, did your parents provide you with any type of financial education? Show of hands. Okay. And I would think that being that we're at a financial conference and that we're involved in the financial space, especially as it concerns cryptocurrency, there would be more people who would have had this type of education by their parental units, their caregivers, and the people who educated them as they grew up. Has anybody had their school, as they were growing up, the school system that they went through, educate them on economics and finance? Few hands. Okay. Well, there's a lot of you here that are sort of like me in this situation. As I grew up in an environment where there was very little interest in monetary conversation. I didn't have any type of financial education. All I can remember is my mom looming over me, telling me that I need to grow up, I need to go to college, I need to get a job, and I need to make money, and I need to save money. But that was the extent of my financial education. I did not have any more education than that, and probably the first bit of economics that I came upon was Keynesian economics. So I entered into the schooling environment, and I was immediately indoctrinated with this abstract idea about money, about finances, and about economics. So I didn't have a grasp of money or personal finances whatsoever. Now, that's going to be one piece of this discussion that I'm going to have. I'm going to look over money in general, finances in general, and try to demystify what money is. But then we're going to dig a little deeper, and we're going to look at the psychology of money. We're going to look at how money affects us behaviorally, cognitively, and emotionally. Now, there is one interesting facet of this particular discussion. I'm going to be mainly talking about fiat currency at first, and that just means the dollars that the banks create. And I'll have to let you know that fiat currency by definition means by decree or by authority. Fiat currency is generally backed by the violence of government, by the violence of central banks. And it's kind of funny, I was just watching Mr. Doug Casey do a talk in the other room, and he called Bitcoin and cryptocurrency fiat currencies. I disagree with Mr. Casey and say that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency is not fiat currency. It is not backed by authority. It is not by decree. It is backed by mathematics, and it is backed by the miners who run those particular computers. And we are going to get more into that as we move through this. But if there's one thing that I want you all to remember from my presentation today, it's that fiat currency can actually harm us psychologically. It can make us impervious to learning about money and to being exposed to financial ideas. On the other hand, cryptocurrency can liberate us Cryptocurrency can make us psychologically more aware, can make us more compassionate, more loving, more dignified, more humane. And this is one of the beautiful things about cryptocurrency. Let's see if I get my clicker. So let's go ahead and demystify money. This is funny. This is a financial conference that we're all at. I've watched as many of the talks as I could today, and I only heard one person actually try to define money, actually provide that initial monetary education. And that was Mr. Casey as well. He did define money. So what is it? Let's talk about it and let's get really in depth. So money is a tool. It's an invention. It's a technology. Money is a medium of exchange. It's how we as humans communicate value to each other. But this poses an interesting problem because when we talk about value, we're talking about an area of our life that is totally and utterly subjective. Money is not something that's concrete in terms of what it is. Yeah, sure, we have dollars, we have gold, but why do these things have value at all? It only has value. Any kind of money only has value because we assign money to it. The great cryptocurrency expert, Andreas Antonopoulos, really summed this up better than most people that I've heard. He referred to this idea of money as being a collective hallucination. We collectively agree that money has value, and that's why we assign value to it, and that's why we use it to exchange goods and services with each other. This has a kind of a funny relationship to quantum physics. I think Colin earlier mentioned a little bit about quantum physics. He talked a bit about it. There's a little joke in physicist circles about quantum physics. And this is a la Richard Feynman. Who's heard of Richard Feynman before? Great physicist. He said that quantum physicists don't even understand quantum physics. How does this relate back to money? It's my contention that the monetary economists and modern day economists don't really understand money. A lot of them haven't even heard of this idea of subjective theory of value. They haven't been exposed to some of these Austrian school of economics and some of these economic lines of thought that don't look at money as having what some people refer to as intrinsic value. Or the only thing that intrinsic value refers to is money having a use case or having a utility. So now that we have a proper and appropriate understanding of money as a medium of exchange with value assigned to it that we collectively imagine that is assigned to it, now we can explore some of the other aspects of specifically fiat currency and its properties. This is one of the toughest things for a lot of people to realize about fiat currency is its properties of how people look at it. So fiat currency is totally and utterly controlled by government, by the central banks. It's printed by these central banks. And so it automatically has an association with authoritarianism, with governments. And it really makes it difficult for us to psychologically internalize money. It's why money topics have been considered so taboo. It's why my family and my educators didn't take the time to really educate me on what money is, because they can't answer the difficult questions. They can hardly answer what money is, much less who prints it, where does it come from, and why can't we just have more of it? Money is also, it has a certain kind of symbolism attached to it. Jeff, in his talk earlier, mentioned this. So anytime you look at money, be it if it's from the United States, if the central banks here have minted it, or any other fiat currencies that are created overseas by governments overseas, it usually always has the impression of the king or the ruler or the master on front of these dollar bills, on the quarters. So money has a very close, especially this fiat currency, a very close association with violence, with authoritarianism. And just think about that initial idea and how that would affect our psychology, how that changes who we are. It's no wonder that parents can't talk to their children about money. It's no wonder that it's a taboo topic in society at large and that nobody wants to deal with it unless under specific circumstances. Thank goodness for conferences like the Nexus, where we can come out here and actually be honest and talk about money and get in depth and talk about it in detail. So this is what it creates psychologically as a master-slave dynamic. When rulers, central bankers, and authorities control the money, it makes the people who use that money serfs or slaves to those individuals. These people, and this is all of us and has been for the longest time, can't really deal with money very well because it's controlled by these individuals who determine the exact amount of it that's going to be printed, how much is in circulation. They inflate the currency. They do with the currency what they will. And it all has immediate consequences and ramifications for how we interact with each other. But now, this idea that money is taboo, there's actually a term for it, and it's not commonly used, but it's called crimatophobia. Crimatophobia just means the fear of money. And I think, I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit here, but I think that one of the reasons why a lot of people have a lot of skepticism of the cryptocurrencies that we're so fond of is because they have inner biases that have been delivered to them by their parents and by society at large that makes them automatically fear money and be skeptical of it. And of course, there are even more reasons that cryptocurrency has for different people to be worried about what this money is going to do when it really starts to take on a mainstream effect, which is actually happening right now. It all has to do with the innate fear and hatred of the wealthy, which we're also going to get into in just a moment. So all this stuff that I'm talking about, and this is funny because I really don't want to just sound like I'm making this stuff up on the spot. So whenever we talk about ideas, I think it's very important that we validate those ideas with as much evidence as we can muster, or the best kind of arguments that we can muster. So there was a study on parents, children, and money. It was a survey. T. Rowe Price's 2015 Parents, Kids, and Money survey. In this survey, the individual who conducted this determined that 3/4 of parents have an inability to communicate financial ideas to their children. They can't talk about money, they can't define money, and they can't really express why they can't talk about it. All that they said is that they don't have the confidence to talk to their children about it, or they don't want to burden their children with monetary ideas because they won't understand it. But guess what? They make that decision and their children never learn about money. So any of you who are like me and you didn't raise your hand earlier, this is why you didn't have a money education. Your parents did not talk to you about it because of what was going on in their own lives, how they felt, but there was the obvious circulating ideas undulating beneath the conscious awareness that money is associated with power and with authority, and it's painful to discuss those ideas. There was a psychologist by the name of Adrian Furnham. He wrote a really great article on Psychology Today called The Psychology of Money. And in this particular article, he mentioned several different surveys that showed that 90%, this is even more, 90% of parents and educators can't talk to their children about money, can't talk to even young adults about money. Huge problem. But the problems with money and how we perceive money and how we understand it goes deeper than that. According to a study done by Jeffrey Dew at the University of Utah, more marriages end in divorce because of financial issues. More people get broken up over the fact that they can't agree on how to handle money and that somebody's spending more or not taking care of their end of the bargain. Has anybody ever had an argument with their significant other in regards to finances? Okay. I didn't think that I was alone in that. I believe in this particular study that Dew conducted, he said that 30% of couples who argue once a week in regards to money issues are definitely going to get a divorce or more likely to get a divorce. Let's talk more about how money affects our ability to empathize with others, our ability to connect with others. And again, I want to make it very clear that right now I'm talking about fiat currency. I'm talking about reserve notes because this is something the researchers don't even consider, but this is the context in which all of these studies were done. It was done under the context of a system that's based on fiat currency and the Federal Reserve banking cartels. This money empathy gap study was conducted by a researcher by the name of Paul Piff out of the University of Berkeley in California. Now, what Piff and his team did, and this is difficult to imagine, it's easy to imagine, but difficult to imagine the outcome. Piff placed two participants in a small room and placed a Monopoly board out there in the room with them so that they could be pitted against each other in a nice friendly game of Monopoly. Well, it turns out the game of Monopoly was not friendly after all, because Piff didn't want to just watch two people play Monopoly. He wanted to watch two people play Monopoly where the game was rigged. And I want you guys to remember about the idea of a game being rigged, because there's definitely a game that's rigged that we have to deal with on a regular basis that we're all well aware of. So Piff made one player advantaged or privileged and one player underprivileged or underadvantaged. The privileged player had 2 dice, so instead of 1, so the privileged player could roll 2 dice and move around the board, the Monopoly board, a lot more often. And they also made money, more money when they passed go, and they started the game with more money. At the very beginning of this particular piece of research, the participants just thought it was funny, it was humorous. They knew that the game was clearly advantage to one player, but at first they didn't think about it much. They just giggled at each other and then commenced to playing Monopoly like nothing was wrong. Can you guess what happened? As they began to play Monopoly, the advantaged person started to get excited, started to smirk. In the words of Paul Piff, the advantaged player got a pompous smirk on their face as they started moving the pieces around the board. And as they moved their piece around the board, as they're rolling 2 dice, they were slamming down the piece and taunting the other player. There was also a bowl of pretzels that were placed besides the Monopoly board, and it was shown that the person who was advantaged or privileged in this scenario just ate the pretzels like crazy, and the underprivileged player did not touch the pretzels at all. Now, here are the conclusions of this, which it's painful, but the conclusions are obvious. The researchers concluded that the advantaged player, because of this situation of being advantaged, they lost touch with their humanity. They lost the ability to connect and to empathize with others, especially with the underprivileged opponent. They no longer had a concern about the other person's plight, and the fact that they knew the game was rigged didn't affect how they acted at all. And this is what Piff has referred to as the money empathy gap. Because of the 2 players had a rigged disadvantage between each other, the ability to empathize for the advantaged player dissipated. And bear in mind, of course, the Monopoly money is a clear representation of fiat currency and how fiat currency can affect us on a psychological level. So it breeds this sort of feedback loop between the advantaged and the disadvantaged, where the advantaged think that they're naturally better and that they don't have to do anything to prove themselves than the underprivileged player or the underprivileged person, even though the system is rigged. That's a problem. But I don't want to come here to this conference today to bog everybody down with bad news and how money makes us greedy and evil and makes us go crazy. Maybe if I can go to the next slide. There we go. What we're dealing with now is a new financial paradigm that's cropping up. And that's really why we're all here at the Nexus meeting. One of the primary reasons is because we understand that this new kind of money, cryptocurrency, is revolutionizing economics, finance, politics. It has the capacity to truly undermine the system and the way that the system functions. Before getting into the specifics of the psychology and the arguments that I have that suggest that these cryptocurrencies will totally and utterly alter our psychological functioning because of the nature of how they work and how much impact they're going to have on society at large. Let's talk a bit about the features that cryptocurrencies generally have. And I want to say generally because there are exceptions to the rule with different cryptocurrencies, because cryptocurrencies can be built different ways by the developers and programmers who are interested in them. Whole different monetary and economic systems can be created on a blockchain alone. So the first primary characteristic, as we all know, of cryptocurrency, and I would think that most people here know, is that they are decentralized. And what this means is that there's no single point of failure when using cryptocurrencies or cryptographic technologies. Instead of having a single point of failure or a honeypot that hackers, malicious entities, government agents, or any other individuals can get involved in and contaminate that entity, these technologies are distributed over what we refer to as the consensus network, where consensus can be determined by a group of individuals in a truly democratic fashion to alter the network and to prevent people from harming the network. Just a bit about our psychology. The current system that we live in is the antithesis of that. Instead of being completely and totally decentralized, the system that we are currently part of is centralized. If we live in a centralized society with controllers manipulating us, manipulating the currency, that's what affects our psychology negatively, as I talked about. So imagine if it's decentralized. What happens when we can actually engage with each other via mesh networks, via interactions directly with each other, and without having to worry about rulers or sociopaths or politicians or bureaucrats or kings or any of these authoritarian types to harm us in some way? That moves right into the next characteristic of this currency. It's peer-to-peer. It's peer-to-peer technology. And that means instead of having an intermediary, a clearinghouse, or a middleman stake a claim to a transaction between two people can make a transaction without having any kind of problems, without having the tax man loom over. And I think Derek actually mentioned this in his talk as well. But there's no one who's going to sift part of the revenue from that transaction. There is fees, but hardly any fees, and they go to the network if there are fees, but there's definitely no taxes that are incurred as a result of a peer-to-peer, a truly peer-to-peer transaction. Another piece of the puzzle when it comes to cryptocurrencies is that they're borderless. Cryptocurrencies, especially like Bitcoin, Nexus, they don't care about national borders. These currencies don't care at all. These transactions can be made from where we're standing right here in Aspen, Colorado, to Japan without any kind of hang-ups, almost instantaneously, depending, of course, on the currency and the protocol that underlies it. Imagine trying to do a transaction with dollars. If you want to send, say, $1 million from here to Japan, what kind of difficulties are you going to encounter when you try to make that transaction? You're going to encounter a lot of problems. First of all, because of the Patriot Act. If you send, just $10,000? If you send around that amount, you're going to have to put down all of your information, document yourself, and then you're going to have to pay a huge, nasty fee. And now the CIA and the FBI and the Homeland Security Department, whoever else knows everything about you, and then probably can continue to fish for information about you if they want. But these currencies overcome that problem. And this is another beautiful part of why cryptocurrencies can help heal society and fiat currencies harm society. When any of these currencies are centralized, it creates these problems where people now get to harm others in a very easy way. It's a nasty system that we're part of. These cryptocurrencies are also permissionless. A lot of them are permissionless, not all of them. There's a such thing as a permissioned blockchain. That's sort of another discussion, a technical discussion for another time. But if these currencies are permissionless, that means that in theory, anybody can alter the code. They can write a little bit of Python if they want, change the code, and gain consensus on the network and upgrade those protocols. Permissionless also means that you don't have to worry about innovating. If you want to innovate with cryptocurrencies, you just do it. You don't have to ask anybody permission to build a blockchain. If you want to know what happens when people try to create dollars or mint new tokens, just go ask what happened to Bernard von Nothaus. Does anybody know who that is? Yeah, the individual who created the Liberty Dollar. So they charged him with counterfeiting, with wire fraud, and with a slew of other charges for doing nothing but wanting to create a currency that would compete with the dollar, with USD. Bernard von Nothaus, N-O-T space H-A-U-S. Yep. Finally, and there's a lot more features, and there's new features coming up in regards to cryptocurrencies all the time, but one of the ones that some blockchains will use, of course, and some others may not use, is being totally transparent. And this is really important for the psychological ramifications, because if you live in a society that uses fiat currencies and uses credit transactions, and you're trying to do some charitable work, or you're claiming that a tax is going to go to a certain person or certain entity or be funded into a certain project, everything that occurs in the fiat currency space by politicians, if they want it to be, or bankers if they want it to be, it won't be transparent. It will be very difficult to find out the flow and the circulation of that particular money. But on a blockchain, especially one like Bitcoin, all transactions are public. And if you want to create a generous fund for your favorite charity or your favorite donation, you just do it, and then everybody can follow exactly where those funds go, and you can be 100% transparent, and that will also raise your respectability in society. Right now, politicians have no respectability because they try to hide everything. They try to lie to us while they're surveilling us, and this is something that has to stop. And I think we will stop it. That's one of the primary reasons that we're all here today. So how exactly is cryptocurrency different? How are these monies really different than fiat currencies? And one of the things, and I've mentioned this briefly in tidbits, is that they change the nature of our relationships with people because it's decentralized and it's peer-to-peer. Now it creates a situation where we can more easily interact with our peers, with our fellow humans. And that allows us to be naturally more compassionate. It bridges the money empathy gap because of the way that we're now allowed to connect with people. Having strong relationships is extremely important when it regards our financial life because it encompasses so much of what we do. Exchanging value with each other is so important. And that's why these cryptocurrencies are going to enable us to do it in a way that makes us happier, that makes us more lively, and that totally alters the fiduciary landscape that we find ourselves in. The fiat currencies, as I mentioned, have a master-slave dynamic. The dynamic that cryptocurrencies use is a friend-to-friend dynamic. This means we can be each other's friend, and this goes along with the relationship component of this as well. I don't have to see another person as just another person in this particular ecosystem. And we can already see how tight-knit and how appreciative of one another we are in the cryptocurrency ecosystems because we know we're building something that is outside the scope of these nasty systems that we find ourselves in. So it also changes our work habits and our patterns of living and makes us a lot more amenable to working with each other in regards to money. It makes us want to talk about money more often. And again, this is just more reasons for us to understand that cryptocurrency has the capacity to heal society, to change the way that we think, to alter our neurology at a fundamental level. And we'll discuss that a little bit more as well. This is one of my favorite things to talk about in regards to this topic, this idea that this money is gamified in an equitable way. When I say that cryptocurrencies are gamified, that means that it reminds, and this is just me personally, it reminds me of a video game that I truly enjoy. Is there any gamers in our presence here, or people who have played games before? So it's gamified, and here's a point to this topic. A lot of people tend to play video games or have a habit of wanting to get involved in video games because they want to escape the tumultuous nature of their lives. They want to get out of having to play in a system that's rigged. I told you to remember that rigged concept. When you're playing in a system that's rigged and it's gamified in a rigged way, who wants to be a part of that game? Who wants to play that if they know they're going to lose because the other player is advantaged? Nobody. So income cryptocurrency. Now it's gamified in such a way that's equitable. Like I said, these cryptocurrencies are permissionless. You don't have to ask permission to build them. You just build them. And if you can't build it yourself, if you can't write the code, you get somebody who can and you work together. And this is what's happening on a grand scale, on a memorable scale that we will remember for a long time. In the scope of gamification, this is an example of how this works. I'm a big fan of a desktop wallet called Exodus. Anybody familiar with Exodus? If you're not familiar with Exodus, that's a desktop wallet that you have to have. It's a multi-asset wallet that was developed by a couple of really cool guys. The website is exodus.io, but they focused on the design of Exodus as an emotional design, as something that was eye-catching, that was aesthetically pleasing, beautiful, and brilliant platform. And the thing with Exodus is it not only looks beautiful, like a World of Warcraft interface, like you're literally playing a game, is that it keeps track of the markets, of course, in real time. Most wallets do this in the cryptocurrency space. But it also has Shapeshift built into it. And, you know, Eric Voorhees, he's here. He's the CEO of Shapeshift. Shapeshift is a very useful API tool where you can transfer one cryptocurrency to another one at market value for a small fee. So Exodus has Shapeshift built into it, but it even simplifies Shapeshift. At the touch of a button, you can exchange one of your cryptocurrencies for another. So what I do, I'm like a little kid in a candy store. I get onto my Exodus wallet and I will buy some of these cryptocurrencies, move them into the Exodus wallet, and then start exchanging them, and then root for which one's going to win. It very much is a game. I feel like I'm playing StarCraft and I'm generating resources for myself. But this is how we're building wealth of the future, of wealth into the future. We're gamifying it to such a way that makes it understandable, where it's not rigged, and we can create whatever we want to do, and we can earn money and make money and talk about money and heal ourselves, heal our psychology, change who we are on a fundamental level. Speaking of change ourselves on a fundamental level, I mentioned a minute ago about the human brain. The human brain, and this is going to play right into what we're seeing contextually in society with the emergence of cryptocurrencies, but the human brain is very plastic. Is anybody familiar with the concept of neuroplasticity? Cool. So neuroplasticity is a concept that's just really been illuminated in the last 2 decades, really just the last decade in neuroscience. And it's this idea that our environments, how we're raised, and the way that people talk to us, and the choices that we make alter our brain, alter the structure and to the degree the function of our brain, especially in terms of memory. So if we're brought up in an environment that is nasty, that is rigged, that's not gamified in an equitable way, what that's going to do is negatively affect our brain. It's going to produce humans who are more prone to hating money, who are more prone to hating each other, who are more prone to be nasty to one another, who are more prone to violence. The systems that we find ourselves embedded in are what really alter who we are, that really have direct impact on us as human beings. So there's this idea in psychology called nature versus nurture, and this is what it's all about. There's some people who believe that nature or our genetic code is what determines our personality and who we become. And there's another idea called nurture, the idea that our environment, like I just talked about, is what shapes our personality. Well, it turns out that this nature versus nurture, that's what it originally was, nature versus nurture argument was totally wrong. It's not nature versus nurture. It's not one or the other. It's not a dichotomy. Instead, it's nature via nurture. What we've learned is that our human nature, our inbuilt genetic code works intimately and intricately with the environment to change who we are. Income cryptocurrency, decentralized systems, agorism, all of these different ways of relating to each other are going to have far-reaching impact on our psychology. It already is having a far-reaching impact on our psychology and who we are. It's creating a situation where we can finally now connect with each other. It can heal us on a fundamental level. The environments that we find ourselves in totally change who we are as people, even as we go through life making decisions. And this is not to say that it's just these systems that change people. It's also up to us to change ourselves. Derek talked about this earlier in his talk. People have to come to an understanding that they want to be good people. This is true because our own thinking, our own emotional content, the ebb and flux of our emotions are what alter how we react to other people or how we respond to other people. So that's also extremely important. So really what I'm introducing today is a new kind of psychology that's going to be very important for the future. And you don't have to use the same term that I do. This is just how I conceptualize it in my head. But this is a field that I just refer to as crypto-psychology. And it's a field that is ripe for experimentation because there has hardly been any research conducted on how exactly cryptographic and decentralized systems affect us behaviorally, emotionally, and cognitively. Most of the arguments I made were just that, arguments from the deductive process of reasoning, which tend to make a lot of sense, but it's not necessarily factual. And that's not to say that psychological science is the end-all, be-all of this discussion. But there's so much more that we can learn about what we're doing to ourselves right now in terms of creating these blockchain protocols. It's so much more than just altering the economy, than just altering the financial landscape. It's even more than just altering or removing or abolishing government, which for one I think is going to be a fantastic thing, and it's already fantastic that so many people are starting to look outside the scope of government. But imagine a situation where our whole psychology has changed, where our humanness is fundamentally, radically reshaped, redesigned, and retooled to match what these decentralized and peer-to-peer cryptocurrencies are doing for us. We are in the middle of not only a financial renaissance, we're in a cultural renaissance. We're in a time when everything is going to change, and we are all going to be remembered as the individuals who switched up the gear and who started chugging forward without any fears, without any concerns, and with knowledge that we're definitely changing society in that we are removing the evils of government, and we are coming to terms with who we are as humans, as decentralized people, as people who want to be more loving, more compassionate, and more dignified. And I'm not sure what time it is, but I'm fairly certain I have time for questions.
It's 4:07.
Yeah, I have a few minutes if anybody has any questions or thoughts. Sure.
What kind of a physical place would you say would be a good place to kind of do actual testing on this? Like what kind of a research facility would you envision would support this the best?
Sure. So the question is, what kind of research facility would support this type of research the best? And there's a couple of different ways that this could be experimentally designed. We could just do naturalistic settings, which are very difficult to do, but you can watch people use cryptocurrencies and interact in certain environments. So a naturalistic setting would be one way to go about it. But you could also do a typical laboratory design where you could have people use cryptocurrencies in an enclosed space, although that does have some artificial implications. But I think that what will happen, there will be a multitude of different experimental designs where the researchers will try to tease out how exactly cryptocurrencies function.
Just a real quick follow-up.
Sure.
I thought about like a larger scale, like a charter city kind of approach where people sign up to make their work actually living this sort of test life or something.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So he asked, have I considered like a charter city or basically a larger scale look at how these cryptocurrencies affect us psychologically? And I think with what's coming up in terms of seasteading, what Roger talked about earlier in regards to a new libertarian country where it's probably all going to be cryptocurrency based, I think those are definitely ripe for experimentation in the psychology of cryptocurrencies. Great question. Thank you, sir. Any other questions?
Have you looked at the money Scripps, George Kinder, any of those guys that talk about how your money beliefs are formed?
I can't say that I'm familiar with that individual. That's something you'll have to enlighten me on.
We might take a look at it.
Okay.
I would take those applications and then just say, okay, if we use cryptocurrency, what does that look like?
Yeah, that sounds great. Maybe after this, meet me and have a little discussion with me. I would like to hear more about that. Thank you. Yeah. Still have a few minutes, I think.
What's your thoughts on proof of work versus proof of stake versus delegated proof of stake?
You must keep up with my content because you know that I post on Steemit and Steam quite often. I'm just Sterling Lujan on Steemit. You can find me on that. So I think that proof of work obviously is a very valuable function for mining. The idea of creating rewards by using energy and electricity to produce new Bitcoin and to verify and timestamp transactions on a blockchain. But we're seeing that there are some problems with that. Obviously, it takes a large amount of resources, and now there has been a mild amount of centralization, I say mild amount in a loose way, of the mining process, and that can be problematic. Yeah, and that luckily, that doesn't bother me at all, though. I'm not worried about that one bit because we live in an environment where we actually finally have competing currencies. Before cryptocurrencies, there wasn't really true competing currencies, and United States versus the euro or something, that's not a real competing currency. Real competing currencies can be used by you and I within the scope of this room if we want to. But I'm a big fan of proof of stake mixed with proof of work. That's great. I also like delegated proof of stake. That's what the whole Steemit platform is based on. And all that suggests is if we have a large amount of stake in a platform or an enterprise, then we can delegate that stake out to somebody else in the form of blockchain-based rewards and give them money in the form of influence from us, which is an amazing, and I think Dan Larimer actually created that, actually invented that technology with BitShares and with Steemit. And I think that all of these proof of work, proof of stake, all these mining functions are going to continue to grow, and we're going to see some really novel things crop up in the next few years.
I'm in the process of creating with my team a platform, a little bit more, to be humble, advanced than Steve. I'd like to discuss it with you a little bit.
Yeah, sure. You can stop me and we can have a chat. That's not a problem. Where are we at, Terry? 3 minutes. Okay. Any other questions?
I do a lot of work on Dave Ramsey stuff on the board member forum. One of the things Dave tries to teach is trying to get people to go back to using as much cash as possible in the beginning when they're doing a financial reset of some type, just so that you can be in relationship with money again, to feel it when it spends it,
Right.
A little bit. Because all the studies show that people who use predominantly credit cards spend about 10 to 25% more than people who spend cash. Part of that being a convenience factor, part of it being a psychological factor. It's easier to spend on a credit card. I've been trying to figure out, how does that relate to Bitcoin? When we get to the point where we're spending Bitcoin more and more to buy products and services, it's so limited now. Where do you see it in 5 to 10 years if we have a mass adoption of Bitcoin? How does that affect our psychology of spending?
Right. That's a good point, especially with the studies regarding dollars. I don't think it's going to. I think there's going to be a movement to such an extent where there's so many different cryptocurrencies and so many different ways that we can spend, that it's going to negate the fact that it's not physical. So if we have a whole bunch of different cryptocurrencies in an equitably gamified system, then we can have a different amount of currencies to spend all at time, and then we can create our own currencies. One of these days, maybe I'll have Sterling coin, or maybe Derek will have Derek coin, and those days are actually coming as well. So that's, I think, one potential answer to that question. That's a good question, though. It's complex. And if I didn't mention it, he just asked, and this is for the purposes of the microphone, but he asked what happens when people can't use, or what happens to spending psychology as cryptocurrency is more heavily adopted. Okay. Well, I appreciate being here, and you guys were awesome.
Very well. Thank you.
Thank you.